You are listening to The Boy with Wings by Berta Ruck, which is in the public domain. Chapter 15. Leslie Ontoomuch Love. It seemed to be decided for Gwenna that she should, after all, give notice at the office. For on the evening of the day of her climb up the scaffolding, she met the tall, sketchily dressed figure of her chum coming down the hill that she was ascending on her way to the club, and Leslie accosted her with the words, "Child, do you happen to want to leave your place and take another job? Because, if so, come along for a walk and we'll talk about it." So the two inseparables strolled on together up past the club, passing at the crest of the hill a troop of Boy Scouts with their band. "Only chance one ever gets of hearing a drum, jolly sound," sighed Leslie, watching the brown faces, the sturdy legs marching by. "I wonder how many of those lads will be soldiers? Very few, I suppose. We're told that the authorities are so careful to keep the Boy Scout movement apart from any pernicious militarism and ideas about national service." And the girls took the road that dips downward from Hampstead and the chestnut avenue that leads into the park of Golders Green. They passed the bandstand ringed by nurse girls and perambulators. They crossed the rustic bridge above the lily pond, where children tossed crumbs to the minnows. They went in at the door of the little flower garden. Here, except for an occasional sauntering couple, London seemed shut out. In the late sunlight above the maze of paths, the roses were just at their best. Over the pergolas and arbours they hung in garlands. They were massed in great posies of pink and cream and crimson. The little fountain set in the square of velvet turf tossed up a spray of white mist touched with a rainbow, not unlike Gwenna's dance frock. The girls sat down on a shaded seat facing that fountain. Gwenna, turning to her chum, said, "Now do tell me about that job you asked if I'd take. What is it?" "Oh, it's a woman who used to know some of my people. She came to the club this afternoon, and then on to my old lady's to see me about it," said Leslie. "She wants a girl, partly to do secretarial work, partly to keep her company, partly to help her in the odd bits of her work down there where she has her business." Gwenna, rather listlessly thinking of typewriting offices, of blouses or tea-shops, asked what the lady did. Leslie gave the extraordinary answer. "She builds aeroplanes?" "She does," cried Gwenna, all thrilled. "Aeroplanes?" "Yes, she's the only woman who's got an aircraft factory, men, shops and all. It's about an hour's run from town. She's a pilot herself, and her son's an aviator," said Leslie, speaking as though of everyday things. "Everything supplied, from the man to the machine, what?" "Oh, but what a gorgeous sort of life for a woman, Leslie," cried the younger girl, her face suddenly alight. "Fancy spending her time making things like that? Things that are going to make a difference to the whole world, instead of her just settling down and embroidering duchess sets and sitting with teacups like Uncle Hugh's lady parishioners and talking to callers about servants and operations. Oh, don't you want to take her job?" "I'm not especially keen on one job more than another, and my old lady would be rather upset if I did leave her in the lurch," said Leslie, more unselfishly than her chum suspected. The truth was that this much disapproved. Of Leslie had resigned a congenial post because it might mean what Gwenna loved. "I told the aeroplane lady about you," she added. "And she'd like you to go down and interview her at the factory next Saturday if you'd care to." "Care? Of course I'd care. Aeroplanes, after silly buildings and specifications," exclaimed Gwenna, clasping her hands in her grey linen lap. But her face fell suddenly as she added, "But it's an hour's run from London, you say?" "I should have to live there. Away from Troilus and away from Troy," quoted Leslie, smiling. "You could come back to Troy for weekends, Taffy. And I'll tell you what, it's no bad thing for a young man who's always thought of a girl as being planted in one particular place to realise suddenly that she's been uprooted and set up in quite another place. Gives him just a little jerk. By the way, is there any fresh news of Troilus, of the Dampier boy?" And Gwenna, sitting there with troubled eyes upon the roses, gave her the history of that afternoon's adventure. "She ended up sadly, never even said goodbye to me." "Getting nervous that he's going to like you too well," translated Leslie without difficulty. "Probably deciding at this minute that he'd better not see much more of you." "Oh, Leslie," exclaimed the younger girl, alarmed. "Sort of thing they do decide," said Leslie lightly. "Well, we'll see what it amounts to, and we'll wire tomorrow to the aeroplane lady, or telephone down tonight. I am going to telephone to Hugo Swain to tell him I don't feel in the mood to have dinner out tonight again." "Again?" said Gwenna, rather wistfully, as they rose from the arbour and walked slowly down the path by the peach houses. "Has he been asking you out several times, then?" "Several," said Leslie with a laugh. She added in her insouciant way, "You know, he wants to marry me now." Gwenna regarded her with envy. Leslie spoke of what should be the eighth wonder of the world, the making or rejecting of a man's life, as if it were an everyday affair. "Don't look so unflatteringly surprised, Taffy. Strictly pretty I may not be, but a scrupulously neat and ladylike appearance," mocked Leslie, putting out a long arm in a faded silk sleeve that was torn at the cuff, "has often, they tell one, done more to win husbands than actual good looks." Little Gwenna said, startled, "You aren't going to let Mr. Swain be your husband, are you?" "I don't know," said Leslie, reflectively, a little wearily. "I don't know yet. He's fat. But of course that would come off after I'd worried him for a year or so. He's flabby. He's rather like Kipling's person whose rooms at college was beastly. But he's good-natured, and his people were all right, and, Taffy, he's delightfully well off. And when one's turned 26, one does want to be sure of what's coming. One must have some investment that'll bring in one's frocks and one's railway fares and one's proper setting." "There are other things," protested little Gwenna, with a warm memory of that moment's clasping on the heights that afternoon. "There are things one wants more." "Not me." "Ah, that's because you don't know them," declared Gwenna, flushed. And at that the elder girl gave a very rueful laugh. "Not know them. I've known them too well," she admitted. "Listen, Taffy, I'll tell you the sort of girl I am. I'm afraid there are plenty of us about." She sighed and went on with a little nod. "We're the girl who works in the sweet shop and who never wants to touch chocolates again. We're the sort of girl who's been turned loose too early at dances and studio parties and theatricals and so forth. The girl who's come in for too much excitement and flattery and love-making. Yes! For in spite of all my natural disadvantages, tuck in that bit of hair for me, will you? And in spite of not being quite a fool, I've been made too much of by men. The Montys and so forth. Here's where I pay for it. I and the girls like me. We can't ever take a real live interest in men again." "But," objected Gwenna, seeing a mental image of Leslie as she had been at that dance, whirling and flushed and radiant. "You seem to like—" "The chase, not the quarry," quoted Leslie. "For when I've brought down my bird, what happens? He doesn't amuse me any more. It's like having sweets to eat and such a cold that one can't taste 'em." "But that's such a pity." "Do you suppose I don't know that?" retorted Miss Long. "Do you suppose I don't wish to heaven that I could be in love with somebody? I can't, though. I see through men, and I don't see as much in them as there is in myself. They can't boss me, or take me out of myself, or surprise me into admiring them. Why can't they, dash them? They can't even say anything that I can't think of, quicker, first," complained the girl with many admirers resentfully. "And that's a fatal thing to any woman's happiness. Remember, there's no fun for a woman in just being adored." The girl in love, kicking her small brown shoe against the pebbles of the garden path, sighed that she wished that she could try being adored. Just for a change. "Ah, but you, Taffy, you're lucky. You're so fresh, so eager. You're as much in love with that aviator's job as you are with anything else about him. You're as much amused by ordinary things as any other girl is amused by getting a young man. As for what you feel about the young man himself, well, I suppose that's a tune played half a yard to the right of the keyboard of an ordinary girl's capacity. You're keen for life, you've got what men call a thirst you couldn't buy. Wish I were like that." "Well, but it's so easy to be," argued Gwenna, "when you do meet someone so wonderful. It's not so easy to see wonder, let me tell you. It's a gift. I've had it, lost it, spoilt it," mourned the elder girl. "To you everything's thrilling, their blessed airships, the men in them, the air itself. All miracles to you. Everything's an adventure. So would marriage be. Oh, I don't ever think of that. Being always with a person. Oh, it would be too wonderful. I shouldn't expect, even to be a little liked if he once told me so would be enough," whispered the little Welsh girl, so softly that her chum did not catch it. Leslie, striding along, said, "To a girl like me all that's as far behind as the schoolroom. At the stage where I am, a girl looks upon marriage, how? As the last bus home or a settled job at last. That's why she so often ends up as an old man's darling, with some very young man as her slave. That's what makes me ready to accept Hugo Swain. And now forget I ever told you so." The two girls turned homewards, Gwenna a little sad. To think that Leslie should lack what even ordinary little Mabel Butcher had. To think that Leslie, underneath all her gaiety and rattle, should not know any more the taste of real delight. Gwenna, the simple-hearted, did not know the ways of self-critics. She did not guess that possibly Miss Long had been analysing her own character with less truth than gusto. And she was surprised when, as they passed the park gates again, her chum broke the silence with all her old lightness of tone. "Talking of young men," a habit for which Leslie never bothers to apologise. "Talking of young men, I believe there might be some at the aeroplane lady's place. She often has someone there. A gentleman, prentice or pupil or something of that sort, might be rather glad to see a new, pretty face about with real curls." It was then that Gwenna turned up that blushing, but rather indignant little face. "But, Leslie, don't you understand? If there were a million other young men about, all thinking me, all thinking what you say, it wouldn't make a bit of difference to me." "Possibly not," said Miss Long, "but there's no reason why it shouldn't be made to make a difference to the Dampier boy, is there?" "What do you mean, Leslie?" demanded the other girl as they climbed the hill together. For the first time, a look of austerity crossed Gwenna's small face. For the first time it seemed to her that the adored girl-chum was in the wrong. Yes! She had never before been shocked at Leslie, whatever wild thing she said. But now she was shocked. She was disappointed in her. She repeated rebukefully, "What do you mean?" "What?" took up Leslie, defiantly. "Do you think I meant?" "Well, did you mean make Mr. Dampier think other people liked me, and that I might like somebody else better than him?" Something of the sort had crossed the mind of Leslie the limit. "Well, then, it isn't like you." "Think not?" There was more than a hint of quarrel in both the girlish voices. Up to now they had never exchanged a word that was not of affection, of comradeship. Gwenna, flushing deeper, said, It's horrid of you, Leslie." "Why, pray?" "Because it would be sort of deceiving Mr. Dampier, for one thing. It's a trick." "Yes, and not a pretty one either," said little Gwenna, red and angry now. It's what? Well, it's what I should have thought that you yourself, Leslie, would have called so obvious." "Exactly," agreed Miss Long with a flippant little laugh that covered smarting feelings. Taffy had turned against her now. Taffy, who used to think that Leslie could do no wrong. This was what happened when one's inseparable chum fell in love. Leslie said impenitently, "I've never yet found that the obvious thing was the unsuccessful thing, especially when it comes to anything to do with young men. My good child, you and the Dampier boy, you really constitute a pair, each being rather like an artless woodland elf. I mean, can't you see that the dear old-fashioned simple remedies and recipes remain the best? For a sore throat, blackcurrant tea. Never fails. For the hair, macassar oil, unsurpassed since the year 18. For the stimulation of an admirer's interest, jealousy. Jealousy and competition, taffy." "He isn't an admirer," protested the younger girl, mollified. Then they smiled together. The cloud of the first squabble had passed. Leslie said, "Never mind. If you don't approve of my specific, don't think of it again." Chapter 16. The aeroplane, LADY. Curiously enough, Gwenna did think of it again. On the Saturday morning after that walk and talk, she took that long, dull train journey. The only bright spot on it was the passing of Hendon flying ground. Over an hour afterwards she arrived at the little station, set in a sunburnt waste, for the aircraft works. She asked her way of the ticket collector at the booking office. But before he could speak, she was answered by someone else, who had come down to the station for a parcel. This was a shortish young man in greasy blue overalls. He had a smiling, friendly, freckled face under a thatch of brilliant red hair, and a voice that seemed oddly out of keeping with his garments. It was an Oxford voice. "The works? I'm just going on there myself. I'll come with you and show you if I may," he said with evident zest. Gwenna, walking beside him, wished that she had not immediately remembered Leslie's remarks about young men at aircraft works who might be glad of the arrival of a new pretty face. This young man, piloting her down a straggling village street that seemed neither town nor country, told her at once that he was a pupil at the works, and asked whether she herself were going to help Mrs. Crewe there. "I don't know yet," said Gwenna. "I hope so." "So do I," said the young man gravely, but with a glint of unreserved admiration in the eyes under the red thatch. Little Gwenna, walking very erect, wished that she were strong and self-reliant enough not to feel cheered by that admiration. But she was cheered, no denying that. The young man took her down a road flanked on either hand by sparse hedges dividing it from that parched and uninteresting plain. The mountain-bred girl found all this flat country incredibly ugly. Only on her purple Welsh heights and in the green ferny depths threaded by crystal water, nothing ever happened. It was here, in this half-rural desert littered by builders' rubbish and empty cans, that enterprise was afoot. Strange. On the right came an opening. She saw a yard with wooden debris and what looked like the wrecks of a couple of motor cars. Beyond was a cluster of buildings with corrugated iron roofs. As a red-haired pupil mentioned the name of the aeroplane lady and said, "I think you'll find her in the new wing room, over here." What a wonderful name for it, thought the little enthusiast, catching her breath as she was shown through a door. The wing room. It was high and clean and spacious, with white distempered walls and a floor of wood dura, firm yet comforting to the feet. The atmosphere of it was, on that July day, somewhat overpowering. 2 radiators were working, and the air was heavy with a smell of what seemed like rubber. Solution and spirits mixed. This, Gwenna presently found, was the dope to varnish the strong linen stretched across the wings of aeroplanes. 2 of those great wings were laid out horizontally on trestles to dry. Another of the huge sails with cambered sections was set up on end across a corner, and from behind it there moved, stepping daintily and majestically across the floor, the tawny shape of a Great Dane, who came inquiringly up to the stranger. Then from behind the screening wing there came a slight woman's figure in dark blue. She followed the dog. Little Gwenna Williams, standing timidly in that great room so strange and white and characteristically scented, found herself face to face with the mistress of the place, the aeroplane lady. Her hair was greying and fluffy as a head of wind-blown traveller's joy. Beneath it her eyes were blue and young and bright, and yes! With a little glad start, Gwenna recognised that in these eyes, too, there was something of that space-daring gleam of the eyes of Icarus, of her own flying man. "Ah, I know," said the lady briskly. "You're the girl Leslie sent down to see me." "Yes," said Gwenna, thinking it nice of her to say Leslie and not Miss Long. She noticed also that the aeroplane lady wore at the collar of her shirt a rather wonderful brooch in the shape of the caduceus, the serpent-twisted rod of Mercury. "Oh, I do hope she'll take me," thought the young girl, agitated. "I do want more than anything to come here to work with her. Oh, supposing she thinks I'm too silly and young to be any use. Supposing she won't take me." She was tense with nervousness while the aeroplane lady, fondling the Great Dane's tawny ear with a small, capable hand as she spoke, put the girl through a short catechism, asking questions about her age, her people, her previous experience, her salary. And then she was told that she might come and work on a month's trial at the factory, occupying a room in the aeroplane lady's own cottage in the village. The young girl, enraptured, put down her success to the certificates from that Aberystwyth school of hers, where she had passed with distinction the senior Cambridge and other examinations. She did not guess that the aeroplane lady had taken less than 2 minutes to make sure that this little Welsh typist girl carried out what Leslie Long had said of her. Namely that she was so desperately keen on anything to do with flying and flyers that she'd scrub the floors of the shops for you if you wished it, besides doing your business letters as carefully as if each one was about some important diplomatic secret. Try her. So on the following Monday, Gwenna began her new life. At first, this new work of Gwenna's consisted very largely of what Leslie had mentioned, the writing out of business letters at the table, set under the window in the small private office adjoining the great wing room. Curious that the wings for airships, the giant butterfly aeroplanes themselves, should grow out of a chrysalis of ordinary business, with letters that began, "Sir, we beg to thank you for your favour of the 2nd instant, and to assure you that same shall receive our immediate attention," exactly the sort of letters that Gwenna had typed during all those weeks at Westminster. Then there were orders to send off for more bales of the linen that was stretched over the membranes of those wings, or for the great reels of wire which strung the machines, and which cost £15 apiece, orders for the metal which was to be worked in the shops across the parched yard, where men of 3 nationalities toiled at the lathe, turning, screws, strainers, washers, and all the tiny, complicated, looking parts that were to be the bones and the sinews and the muscles of the finished flying machine. Gwenna, the typist, had at first only a glimpse or so of these other sides of the works. Once, on a message from some visitor to the aeroplane lady, she passed through the great central room, larger than her uncle's chapel at home, with its concrete floor and the clear diffused light coming through the many windows, and the never-ceasing throb of the gas-driven engine pulsing through the lighter sounds of chinking and hammering. Mechanics were busy all down the sides of this hall, in the aisle of it. 3 machines in the making were set up on the stands. One was ready, all but the wings. Its body seemed now more than it would ever seem that of a giant fish. It was covered with the doped linen that was laced at the seams with braid, eyelets and cord, like an old-fashioned woman's corset. The second was half covered. The third was all as yet uncovered, and looked like the skeleton of a vast seagull cast up on some prehistoric shore. And wondering, the girl passed on to find her employer. She found her in the fitter's shop. In a corner, the red-haired pupil, with goggles over his eyes, was sitting at a stand working in a acetylene blowpipe, holding in his hand the intense jet that shot out showers of squib-like sparks, and wielding a socket, the lady directing him. She took the girl's message, then walked back with her to the office, her tawny dog following at her heels. "Letters finished? Then I'd like you to help me on with the wings of that machine that's all but done," she said. "That is," she smiled, "if you don't mind getting your hands all over this beastly stuff." "Mind." And Gwenna would have plastered her whole little white body with that warmed and strongly smelling dope if she'd thought that by so doing she was actually taking a hand in the launching of a ship for the clouds. The rest of the afternoon she spent in the hot and reeking wing room, working side by side with the aeroplane lady. Industriously she pasted the linen strips, patting them down with her little fingers onto the seams of those wide sails that would presently be spread. For whom? In her mind it was always one large and springy figure that she saw ascending into the small plated wicker seat of the machine. It was always the same careless, blonde lad's face that she saw tilted slightly against the background of plane and wires. I would love to work, even a little, on a machine that he was going to fly in, thought Gwenna. She stood, enveloped in a grey-blue overall, at the trestle table, cutting out fresh strips of linen with scissors that were sticky and clobbed with dope. She peeled the stuff from her hands in flakes like the bark of a silver birch as she added to her thought. But I shouldn't want to do anything for that aeroplane, his fiancée, for the PDQ hateful creature, with her claws that she doesn't think are going to let him go. Here she set the pannikin of dope to reheat, and there was a smile of defiance on the girl's lips as she moved about from the trestles to the radiator or the sewing table. For ever since she had been at the works, a change had come over Gwenna. Curiously enough, she was happier now than she had been in her life. She was more contented with what the present brought her, more steadily hopeful about the future. It didn't seem to matter to her now that, the last time she had seen him, her aviator had turned almost sullenly away. She laughed to herself over that, for she believed at last in Leslie's theory, afraid he's going to like me. She did not fret because she hadn't had even one of his brief notes since she had left London, nor sigh over the fact that she, living down here in this Bedfordshire village, was so much further away from those rooms of his at Camden Town than she had been when she had stayed at the Hampstead Club. For somehow she felt nearer to him now. Absence can, in some subtle, unexplained way, spin fine threads of communication over the gulf between a boy and a girl. She found a conviction growing stronger and stronger in her girl's mind, that gay, tangled chaos where faults and faculties, blindness and intuitions flourish, entwined and inseparable. She was meant to be his. She'd no reason for thinking so, of course. There was very little reason about Gwenna's whole make-up. For instance, Leslie had tried reasoning with her the night before she'd left the Hampstead Club. Leslie had taken it into her impish black head to be philosophical and to attempt to talk her chum into the same mood. Leslie, the nonchalant, had given a full hour to her comments on marriage. We will allow her a full chapter, but a short one. Chapter 17. Leslie O.N. Marriage. She'd said, "Supposing the moon did fall into your lap, Taffy? Suppose that young cloud-dweller of yours did A. take you flying, and B. propose to you, and she'd recited solemnly, 'Somewhere I've read that the gods, waxing wroth at our mad importunity, hurl us our boon, and it falls with the weight of a curse at our feet, perilous thing to intrude on their lofty Olympian immunity. Take it and die, say the gods, and we die of our fondest conceit. Yes, of it, after having it, who'd mind dying then? But if it hadn't been worth it, Taffy, suppose you were air-sick,' Leslie had suggested. Worse, suppose you were Paul sick? Yes, supposing that superboy of yours himself was the disappointment. Suppose none of his little ways happened to please you. Men don't realize it, but in love a man is much easier to please than a woman." "No, Leslie, no," had come from the girl who knew nothing of love-making, less than nothing since she thought she knew. Leslie had persisted. "The first pet name a man calls you, awfully important that. may hash up love's young dream forever. Some men, I believe, begin with dear old something or other. That's the end. Or something that you know you're obviously not, such as little woman to me, or they don't notice something that's specially there for them to notice. That's unforgivable. Or they do notice something that's quite beside the mark, or they repeat themselves. Not good enough, a man who can't think of one new way of saying he cares each day. Even a calendar can do that. Saying the wrong thing, though, isn't as bad as being silent. That's fatal. Gives a girl such a lot of time to imagine all the things that another man might have been saying at the time. That's why men with no vocabularies ought never to get engaged or married. I'm a man of few words, they say. They ought to be told. Very well. Outside. It simply means you won't trouble to amuse me. Exit the illusion. Alas, how easily things go wrong. A look too short, or a kiss too long, especially with a look too short. Yes, Leslie had concluded impressively. Suppose the worst tragedy happened. Suppose the Dampier boy did get engaged to you, and then you found out that he didn't in the least know how to make love. To make love to you, I mean. There wouldn't have to be any love made, little Gwenna had murmured, flushing. Where he was, the love would be. My dear, you are what Hugo Swain calls a pass east in love. Why wasn't I brought up in the heart of the mountains and far away from any other kind of heart until I was 22 and then hurled into a love affair with the first decent-looking young man? Leslie had cried with exaggerated envy. The happier you, but Taff, do remember that love is a lad with wings, like yours. Even if the engagement were all your fancy painted, that grand firework display sort of feeling couldn't last. Don't shoot, it's true. People couldn't go on living their lives and earning their livings and making their careers and having their babies if it did last. It must alter. It must die down into the usual dear old sun rising every morning. So, when your oiseau de feu married you, and you found he was just, a husband, like everybody else's, not like anybody, indignantly. How do you know what he's like? Leslie had demanded. What do you know of his temper? Men with that heather honey kind of smile and those deep dimples very often have a beastly temper. Probably jealous. I would love him to be that. You wouldn't love to be poor, though. Leslie had gone off on another tack. Poor and uncomfortable. I shall never be comfortable again without him, Gwenna had said obstinately. Might as well be uncomfortable with him. In a nasty little brick villa near Hendon, so as to be close to the flying, perhaps, with a horrid dark bathroom, and the smell of cooking haddocks and of Lux all over it. Leslie had enlarged. And you having to use up all your own little tiny income to help pay the butcher, and the gaslight and coke company, and the rates and loathsome details of that sort that a woman never feels a ha'porth the better for. Instead of being able to get yourself fresh gloves and silk stockings and a few trifles of that sort that make absolutely all the difference to a woman's life. Not all the difference, indeed, Gwenna had said softly. But Leslie had continued to draw these fancy pictures of married life as lived with Mr. Paul Dampier. Taffy, for one thing, you've never seen him anything but nicely, groomed and attractive to look at. You try to imagine him in what Kipling calls the ungirt hour. They talk of a woman's slatternliness killing love. Have they seen a man when he hasn't bothered to groom himself? That sight, she had shaken her black head ineffably over the mental image of it, and had averred, that sight ought to be added to the valid and legitimate causes for divorce. A wife ought to be able to consider herself as free as air after the first time that she sees her husband going about the house without a collar. Sordid, unbecoming grey flannel about his neck. 3 half-buttons, smashed in the wringer, hanging by their last threads to his shirt, and his old slippers bursting out at the side of the toe, and his comfortable jacket on, with matches and fur in all the pockets and a dab of marmalade, also furred, on the front, and himself unshaved, with a zigzag parting to his hair. I believe some men do go about like this before their wives, and then write wistful letters to the Daily Mirror about, "Why is marriage the tomb of romance?" Gwenna had sniffed. Oh, some men, those! Valid cause for divorce, number 93, the state of the bedroom floor, Leslie had pursued. I, slut as I am, do pick things up sometimes. Men, never. Ask any married woman you know. Maudie told me. Everything is hurled down, or stepped out of, or merely dropped, and left. Left, my child, for you to gather up. Everything out of the chest of drawers tossed upon the carpet. Handkerchiefs, dirty old pipes, shirts, ties in one red burial blent. That means he's been looking for something. Mind, you've got to find it. Men are born fine silly. Men never yet have found anything. except the North Pole and a few things like that are no earthly good in a villa, but they are forever losing things. Gwenna had given a smile to the memory of a certain missing collar, stud that she had heard much of. Yes, I suppose to be allowed to find his collar. Studs is what he'd consider paradise enow for any girl, Leslie had mocked. I misdoubt me that the Dampier boy would settle down after a year of marriage into a regular sultan of the hearthrug, looking upon his wife as something that belongs to him and goes about with him, like a portmanteau, putting you in your place as less than the dust beneath his chariot, that is, beneath his biplane wheels. Leslie, I shouldn't mind. I'd like to be. I believe it is my place, Gwenna had interrupted, lifting towards her friend a small face quivering with conviction. He could make anything he liked or chose of me. What do I care? Not for clothes flung down in rings all over the floor like when a trout's been rising, nor for trousers left standing there like a pair of opera glasses or concertinas, braces all tangled up on the gas bracket, overcoat and boots crushing your new hat on the bed. 17 holy socks for you to mend, all odd ones, for you to sort. Little Gwenna had cried out, I'd want to. I'm not afraid you won't get what you want, Leslie had said finally. All I hope is that your wish won't fail when you get it, and of that Gwenna was never afraid. I should not care for him so much if he were not the only one who could make me so happy, she told herself. And unless the woman's very happy, surely the man can't be. It must mean then that he'll feel, some day, that this would be the way to happiness. I'm sure there are some marriages that are different from what Leslie says. Some where you go on being sweethearts even after you're quite old friends, like, I could make it like that for him. I feel I could. Yes, she felt that someday, perhaps not soon, she must win him. Sometimes she thought that this might be when her rival, the perfected machine, had made his name and absorbed him no longer. Sometimes, again, she told herself that he might have no success at all. Then he'd see there was something else in the world. Then he would turn to me, said the girl to herself. She added, as every girl in love must add, no one could care as I do. And one day she found on the leaf of the tear-off calendar in her cottage bedroom a line of verse that seemed to have been written for her. It remained the whole of Browning as far as Gwenna Williams was concerned, and it said, What's death? You'll love me yet? Chapter 18. Obvious thing. She was in this mood to win a waiting game on the day that Paul Dampier came down to the aircraft works. This was just one of the more wonderful happenings that waited round the corner and that the young girl might hope to encounter any day. The first she knew of it was from hearing a remark of the aeroplane ladies to one of her French mechanics at the lathes. This will make the 18th pattern of machine that we've turned out from this place, she said. I wonder if it's going to answer, Andre. Which machine, madam? The man asked. He was a big fellow, dark and thick-haired and floridly handsome in his blue overalls, and his bright eyes were fixed interestedly upon his principal as she explained through the buzz and the clack and the clang of machinery in the large room, this new model that Colonel Conyers wants us to make for him. Gwenna caught the name. She thought breathlessly, That's his machine. He's got aircraft Conyers to take it up and have it made for him. It's his. She thought this, even before the aeroplane lady concluded. It's the idea of a young aviator I know, such a nice boy, Paul Dampier of Hendon. The French mechanic put some question, and the aeroplane lady answered, Might be an improvement. I hope so. I'd like him to have a show anyhow. He's sending the engine down tomorrow afternoon. They'll bring it on a lorry. Ask Mr. Ryan to see about the unloading of it. I may not get back from town before the thing comes. Now Mr. Ryan was that red-haired pupil who had conducted Gwenna from the station on the day of her first appearance at the works. Probably Leslie Long would have affirmed that this Mr. Ryan was also a factor in the change that was coming over Gwenna and her outlook. Leslie considered that no beauty treatment has more effect upon the body and mind of a woman than has the regular application of masculine admiration. Admiration was now being lavished by Mr. Ryan upon the little new typist with the face of a baby angel and the small, rounded figure, and Mr. Ryan saw no point in hiding his approval. It did not stop at glances. Before a week had gone by, he had informed Miss Williams that she was a public benefactor to bring anything so delightful to look at as herself into those beastly, oily, dirty shops, that he hated, though, to see a woman with such pretty fingers having to mess 'em up with that vile dope, and that he wondered she hadn't thought of going on the stage. But I can't act, Gwenna had told him. What's that got to do with it? The young man had inquired blithely. All they've got to do is to look. You could beat 'em at that. Oh, what nonsense, Mr. Ryan, the girl had said, more pleased than she admitted to herself, and holding her curly head erect as a brown tulip on a sturdy stem. Not nonsense at all, he argued. I tell you, if you went into musical comedy and adopted a strong enough Cockney accent, there'd be another stage and society wedding before you could say knife. You could get any young peer to adore you, Miss Gwenna, if you smiled at him over the head of a toy pom and called him Fice. I can just see you becoming a Gaiety puss and marrying some duke. I don't want to marry any dukes. Thanks. I'm sure I don't want you to, Mr. Ryan had said softly. I'd miss you too much myself. The fact is that he was a flirt for the moment out of work. He was also of the type that delights in the proximity of girl, using the word as one who should say game. Girl suggested to him, as to many young men, a collective mass of that which is pretty, soft, and to be made love, too. He found it pleasant to keep his hand in by paying these compliments to this new instalment of girl, who was rather a little pet, he thought, though rather slow. As for Gwenna, she bloomed under it, gaining also in poise. She learned to take a compliment as if it were an offered flower, instead of dodging it like a brickbat, which is the very young girl's failing. She found that even if receiving a compliment from the wrong man is like wearing a right-hand glove on the left hand, it is better than having no gloves. Especially it is better than looking as if one had no gloves. The attentions of young Ryan, his comment on a new summer frock, the rose laid by him on her desk in the morning, these things were not without their effect. It was a different effect from any intended by the red-haired pupil, who was her teacher in all this. She would find herself thinking, he doesn't look at me nearly so much, I notice, in a trimmed-up hat or a fussy blouse. Men don't like them on me, perhaps. That blouse or hat would be discarded. Or, well, if so and so about me pleases him, it'll please other men. And for men, she read always the same one. She never realized that if she had not met Paul Dampier, she might have fallen in love with young Peter Ryan. Presently he had begged her to call him Peter. She wouldn't. I think I'd do anything for you, young Ryan had urged, if you asked for it, using my Christian name. Gwenna had replied, very well. If there's anything I ever want, frightfully badly, that you could give me, I shall ask for it like that. You mean there's nothing I could give you? He had reproached her, in the true flirt's tone. It can sound so much more tender, at times, than does the tone of the truest lover. A note or so of it had found its way into Gwenna's soft voice these days. Yes, she had half unconsciously learned a good deal from Mr. Ryan. I say, Miss Gwenna, Mr. Ryan's rust-red head was popped round the door of the wing, room where Gwenna alone was pouring dope out of the tilted 10-gallon can on the floor into her little pannikin. Come out for just 1 minute. Too busy, demurred the girl. No time. Not just to look, he pleaded, at the really pretty job I'm making of unloading this lorry with Dampier's engine. Quickly, Gwenna set down the can and came out, in her pinafore, to the breezes and sunshine of the yard outside. It was as much because she wanted to see what there was to be seen of that fiancé of the aviator's, as because this other young man wanted her to admire the work of his hands. Those hands themselves, Gwenna noticed, were masked and thick, halfway up his forearms with soft soap. This he seemed to have been smearing on certain boards, making a sliding way for that precious package that stood on the low lorry. The boards were packed up in banks and stages, an irregular stairway. This another assistant was carefully trying with a long, straight edge with a spirit level in the middle of it, and a third man stood on the lorry, resting on a crowbar and considering the package that held the heart of Paul Dampier's machine. You see if she doesn't come down as light as a bubble and stop exactly there, said Mr. Ryan complacently, digging his heel into a pillowy heap of debris. Lay those other planks to take her inside, André. He wiped his brow on a moderately clear patch of forearm and moved away to check the observations of the man in the shirt-sleeves. Gwenna, watching, could not help admiring both this self-satisfied young mudlark and his job. This was how women liked to see men busy, with strenuous work that covered them with dirt and sweat, taxing their brains and their muscles at the same time. Those girls who were so keen on the enfranchisement of women and equal opportunities, and those things, those suffragettes at her Hampstead club, who couldn't see where the superiority of the male sex was supposed to come in. Well, the reason why they couldn't was, the more primitive Gwenna thought, simply because they didn't see enough men at this sort of thing. The men these enlightened young women knew best sat indoors all day, writing that sort of thing, or talking about fans, like Mr. Swain, and about the right tone of purple in the curtains for a room. The women, of course, could do that themselves. They could also go to colleges and pass men's exams. Lots did. But, thought Gwenna, not many of them could get through the day's work of Mr. Ryan, who had also been at Oxford, and who not only had forearms that made her own look like ivory toys, but who could plan out his work so that if he said that squat, ponderous case would stop exactly there, stop there it would. She watched, the breeze rollicking in her curls, spreading the folds of her grey-blue pinafore out behind her like a sail, moulding her skirt to her rounded shape as she stood. Then she turned with a very friendly and pretty smile to young Ryan. It was thus that Paul Dampier, entering the yard from behind them, came upon the girl whom he had decided not to see again. He knew already that his little friend, as old Hugo insisted upon calling her, had taken a job at the aircraft works. He'd heard that from his cousin, who'd been told all about it by Miss Long. And considering that he'd made up his mind that it would be better all round if he were to drop having anything more to say to the girl, young Dampier was glad, of course, that she'd left town. That would make things easier. He wouldn't seem to be avoiding her, yet he needn't set eyes upon her again. Of course he'd been glad. He hadn't wanted to see her. Then, at the end of his negotiations with Colonel Conyers, he'd understood that he would have to go over and pay a visit to the aeroplane lady. And even in the middle of the new excitement he had remembered that this was where Gwenna Williams was working. And for a moment he'd hesitated. That would mean seeing the little thing again after all. Then he'd thought, well, fellow can't look as if he were trying to keep out of a girl's way. Besides, chances were he wouldn't see her when he did go, he'd thought. It wasn't likely that the aeroplane lady kept her clerk, or whatever she was, in her pocket, he'd thought. He'd just be taken to where the PDQ was being assembled, he'd supposed. The little thing would be kept busy with her typing, and one thing and another in some special office, he'd expected. What he had not expected to find was the scene before him. The little thing idling about outside the shops here, hatless, pinafored, looking absolutely top-hole and perfectly at home, chatting with the ginger-haired bloke who was unloading the engine as if he were no end of a pal of hers. She was smiling up into his face and taking a most uncommon amount of interest, it seemed, in what the fellow had been doing. And before she'd said she wasn't interested in machinery, thought Dampier as he came up, feeling suddenly unconscionably angry. He forgot the hours that the little thing had already passed in hanging on every word, mostly about a machine, that had fallen from his own lips. He only remembered that moment at the Smiths' dinner party when she'd admitted that sort of thing didn't appeal to her. Yet here she was, deep in it, by Jove. He had come right up to her and this other chap before they noticed him. She turned sharply at the sound of the young aviator's rather stiff "good afternoon." She'd expected that day to see his engine, no more. Here he stood, the maker of the engine, backed by the scorched, flat landscape, in the sunlight that picked out little clean-cut, intense shadows under the rim of his straw hat, below his cleft chin, along his sleeve and the lapel of his jacket, making him look, she thought, like a very good snapshot of himself. He had startled her again, but this time she was self-possessed. She came forward and faced him, prettier than ever, somehow, he thought again, with tossed curls and pinafore blowing all about her. She might have been a little schoolgirl let loose from some class in those gaunt buildings behind her. But she spoke in a more grown-up manner in some way than he'd ever heard her speak before. Looking up, she said in the soft accent that always brought back to him his boyish holidays in her country, "How do you do, Mr. Dampier? I'm afraid I can't shake hands. Mine are all sticky with dope." "Oh, are they?" he said, and looked away from her, not without effort, to the ginger-haired fellow. "This," said Gwenna Williams, a little self-consciously at last, "is Mr. Ryan." "Plenty of self-assurance about him," he nodded, and said in a hale, fellow, well-met sort of voice, "Hello, you're Dampier, are you? Glad to meet you. You see we're hard at it unpacking your engine here." Then he looked towards the opening, the road, and the car, borrowed as usual, in which the young aviator had motored down. There was another large package in the body of the car, a box, iron-clamped, with letters stenciled upon it, and sealed. "Something else interesting that you've brought with you," said this insufferable man called Ryan. "Here, Andre, fetch that box down." "No," interrupted young Dampier curtly. The curtness was only partly for this other chap. That sealed box, for reasons of his own and Colonel Conyers, was not to be hauled about by any mechanic in the place. "You and I'll fetch that in presently for Mrs. Crewe, right? She'll be back at 3 o'clock, Ryan told him. "She told me to ask you to have a look round the place or do anything you cared to until she came in." "Oh, thanks," said young Dampier. At that moment, what he would have cared to do would have been to get this girl to himself somewhere where he could say to the little humbug, "Look here, you aren't interested in machinery. You said so yourself. What are you getting this carroty-headed ass to talk to you about it for?" Seeing that this was out of the question, he hesitated. He didn't want to go round the shops with this fellow to whom he'd taken a dislike, on sight. He did that sometimes. On the other hand, he couldn't do what he wanted to do. Sit and talk to the little thing until the aeroplane lady returned. What about saying he'd got to look up someone in the village and bolting until 3 o'clock? No fear. Why should this other fellow imagine he could have the whole field to himself for talking to her? So the trio, the age-old group that is composed of 2 young men and a girl, stood there for a moment rather awkwardly. Finally the little thing said, "Well, I've got to go back to my wings," and turned. Then the fellow Ryan said, "1 minute, Miss Gwenna, all but her Christian name." And he, Paul Dampier, who'd known her a good deal longer, he'd never called her anything at all, but "You, Miss Gwenna, if you please." What followed was even more of a bit of dashed cheek, for the fellow turned quickly aside to her and said, "I say, it's Friday afternoon. Supposing I don't see you again tomorrow morning, it's all right, isn't it, about your coming up to town for that matinee with me?" "Oh yes, thanks," said the little thing brightly. "I asked Mrs. Crewe, and it's all right." Then the new note crept into her voice, the half-unconsciously acquired note of coquetry. She said, smiling again at the red-haired Ryan, "I am so looking forward to that." And, turning again to the airman, she said with a half-shy, half-airy little smile that, also, he found new in her, "Have you seen the cinema star? Mr. Ryan is going to take me tomorrow afternoon." "Oh, is he?" said Paul Dampier shortly. "Was he, indeed? Neck. You do come up to town sometimes from here, then?" added Mr. Dampier to Miss Gwenna Williams, speaking a trifle more distinctly than usual, as he concluded, "I was just going to ask you whether you could manage to come out with me tomorrow evening?" Nobody was more surprised to hear these last words than he himself. Until that moment he hadn't had the faintest intention of ever asking the girl out anywhere again. Now here he was, he'd done it. The little thing had murmured, "Oh!" and was looking, yes, she was looking pleased. The fellow was looking as if he'd been taken aback. Good. He probably thought he was going to have her to himself for the evening as well as for the matinee. Dinner at the Petite Riche, a music hall afterwards, travel down home with her. Well, Dampier had put a stopper on that plan, but now that he had asked her, where was he going to take her himself? To another musical comedy? No. Too like the other chap. To one of the exhibitions? No, not good enough. Anyhow, wherever he took her, he hadn't been out, bidden by this soft, soapy young idiot. Infernal cheek. Then, all in a flash, the brilliant solution came to Paul Dampier. Of course, yes, he could work it. The aviation dinner, he'd meant to go. He would take her. It would involve taking Mrs. Crewe as well, never mind. It was something to wish that other young ass wouldn't have the chance of taking her, and that was enough. "Yes," he went on saying, as coolly as if it had all been planned. "There's a show on at the Wilbur Club, Wilbur Wright, you know. I thought I'd ask if you and Mrs. Crewe would care to come with me to the dinner. Will you? Just break that packing up a bit more," he added negligently to the red-haired youth. "And check those spaces. Will you take me into your place, Miss Williams?" That, he thought, was the way to deal with poachers on his particular preserves. It was only when he got inside the spacious white wing room and sat down, riding a chair, close to the trestle table, where the girl bent her curly head so conscientiously over the linen strips again, that he realized that this little thing wasn't his particular preserves at all. Hadn't he? Only a couple of weeks ago. Definitely decided that she was never to mean anything of the sort to him. Hadn't he resolved? Here, with his long arms crossed over the back of the chair as he sat facing and watching her, he put back his head and laughed. "What are you laughing at?" she asked, straightening herself in the big pinafore with its front all stiff with that sticky mess she worked with. He was laughing to think how dashed silly it was to make these resolutions. Resolutions about which people you were or were not to see anything of, as if fate didn't arrange that for you, as if you didn't have to leave that to fate and to take your chance. Possibly fate meant that he and the little thing should be friends, great friends. Not now, of course. Not yet. In some years' time, perhaps, when his position was assured, when he'd achieved some of the big things that he'd got to do, when he had got something to offer a girl. Ages to wait. Still, he could leave it at that, now, he thought. It might, or might not, come to anything. Only, it was ripping to see her. He didn't tell her this. He uttered some conventional boy's joke about being amused to see her actually at work for the first time since he'd met her, and she made a little bridling of her neck above that vast gull-like wing that she was pasting, and retorted that, indeed, she worked very hard. Really, he teased her. Always seem to be taking time off whenever I've come. You've only come twice, Mr. Dampier, and then it's been sort of lunchtime. Oh, I see, he said. I may smoke, mayn't I? And he lighted a cigarette. Do you always take your lunch out of doors, Miss Gwenna? He didn't see why he shouldn't call her that. She said, I'd like to. Then she was suddenly afraid he might think she was thinking of their open-air lunch in that field weeks ago, and she said quickly, still working, I was so glad when I heard about the engine coming, and that Colonel Conyers had ordered the PDQ to be made here. I do congratulate you, Mr. Dampier. Tell me about the machine, won't you? He said. Oh, you'll hear all about that presently, but look here, you haven't told me about you. Gwenna could scarcely believe her ears, but yes, it was true. He was turning from talk about the machine, the PDQ, the fiancé, asking for the first time about herself. She drew a deep breath. She turned her bright, greeny-brown eyes sideways, longing at that moment for Leslie with whom to exchange a glance. Her own shyly triumphant look met only the deep, wise eyes of the Great Dane, lying in his corner of the wing-room beside his kennel. He blinked, thumped his tail upon the floor. Darling, whispered Gwenna, a little shakily, as she passed the tawny dog. Darling! She had to say it to something just then. Paul Dampier pursued, looking at her over his crossed arms on the back of that chair. You haven't said whether you'll come tomorrow night. She asked, as if it mattered to her where she went, as long as it was with him. What is this dinner? The Wilbur dinner? Oh, there's one every year. Just a meeting of those interested in flying. I thought you might care. Who'll be there? Oh, just people. Not many. Some ladies go. Why? Only because I haven't got anything at all to wear, announced Gwenna, much more confidently, however, than she could have done before Mr. Ryan had told her so much about her own looks, except my everlasting white and the blue sash-like at the Smiths. Well, that was awfully pretty, wasn't it? Only... What? Well, may I say something? Well, what is it? Frightfully rude, really, said Paul Dampier, tilting himself back on his chair and still looking at her over a puff of smoke, staring even. She was something to stare at. Why was she such a lot prettier? Had he forgotten what her looks were? She seemed, today, so much more of a woman than he'd ever seen her. He forgot that he was going to say something. She, with a little fluttering laugh, for which he could have clasped her, reminded him. What's the rude thing you were going to say to me? Oh, it's only this. Don't go muffling your neck up in that sort of rough affair this time. Looks ever so much nicer without, said the boy. The girl retorted with quite a good show of disdainfulness. I don't think there's anything quite so funny as men talking about what we wear. Oh, all right, said the boy, and pretended to be offended. Then he laughed again and said, I've still got something of yours that you wear, as a matter of fact. Of mine? Yes, I have. I've never given it you back yet. That locket of yours that you lost. Oh, she exclaimed. That locket, that little heart-shaped pendant of mother-o'-pearl that she had worn the first evening that she'd ever seen him, and that she had dropped in the car as they were driving back. So much had happened, she felt she was not even the same Gwenna as the girl who had snapped the slender silver chain about her neck before they set out for the party. She'd given up wondering if her airman had forgotten to give it back to her. She'd forgotten all about it herself. And he'd had it, one of her own personal belongings, somewhere in his keeping all this time. Oh yes, my little mascot, she said. Have you got it? Not here. It's in my other jack. It's at my rooms. I'll bring it to the dinner for you. And, look here, Miss Gwenna. He tilted forward again as the girl passed his side of the table to reach for the little wooden pattern by which she cut out a patch for the end of the strip, and then passed back again. I say, he began again, a trifle awkwardly, if you don't mind, I want you to give me something in exchange for that locket. Oh, do you? Murmured Gwenna. What? And a chill took her. She didn't want him, here and now, to ask for what Mr. Ryan might have asked. But it was not a kiss he asked for, after all. He said, You know those little white wings you put in your shoes? You remember, the night of that river dance? Well, I wish you'd let me have one of those to keep as my mascot. He hadn't thought of wishing it until they had intruded into his ken that other young man who made appointments, and who might have the cheek to ask for keepsakes, but who shouldn't be first after all. Anxiously, as if it were for much more than that feathered trifle of a mascot that he asked, he said, Will you? Oh, if you like. Sure you don't mind. Mind? I should like you to have it, said Gwenna softly. Really? And across the great white aeroplane wing, the girl looked very sweetly and soberly at her aviator, who had just asked that other tiny wing of her, as a knight begged his lady's favour. It was at this moment that the aeroplane lady, an alert figure in dark blue, came into a room where a young man and a girl had been talking idly enough together, while one smoked, and the other went on working with that 5-foot barrier of the wing between them. The aeroplane lady, being a woman, was sensitive to atmosphere, not the spirit and solution-scented atmosphere of this place of which she was mistress, but another. In it she caught a vibration of something that made her say to herself, "Bless me, what's this? I never knew those two had even met. Not saying so, I suppose, but certainly engaged, or on the verge of it." Which all went to prove that the rebuked, the absent Leslie, was not far wrong in saying that it is the obvious thing that always succeeds. Chapter 19. THE, sealed BOX. Whatever the aeroplane lady thought to herself about the two in the wing room, there was no trace of it in her brisk greeting to Paul Dampier. "I hope you haven't been waiting long," she said. "I'm ready now." Then she turned to her girl assistant, who was once more laying the tacky strips of linen along the seams. "That's right," she said. "You can go straight on with that wing. That will take you some time. One of the wings for your machine," she added to the aviator. "I'm ready, Mr. Dampier." She and the young man left the wing room together and entered the adjoining office, closing the door behind them. Left alone, Gwenna went on swiftly working, and as swiftly dreaming. Rapidly, but none the less surely, seam after long seam was covered, and the busyness of her fingers seemed to help the fancies of her brain. One of the wings for his machine, she thought, and there was I, thinking I should mind working for that. For her, she smiled. I don't, after all. I needn't care now. Her heart seemed singing within her. Nothing had happened, really. Only she was sure of her lover. That was all. All. She worked, and her small feet on the floor seemed set on air, as in that flying dream. Such a great, huge wing for her, she murmured to herself. Such a little wing for himself that he asked for. My tiny one that I put in my shoe. It was for him I put it there, and now it's begun to bring him to me. It has, she exulted. He's begun to care. I know he does. From the other side of the door came a heightened murmur of voices in the office. Something heavy seemed to be set down on the floor. That sealed box, perhaps, that he'd brought with him in the car. Then came the shutting of the outer door. Mr. Ryan passed the window. Then a sound of hammering in the office, and the long squeak of a nail being prized out of wood. They were opening that mysterious package of his. Gwenna's fingers flew over her own task to the tune of her joyous thoughts. I don't care how long it lasts before anything else happens. Don't care how this flying machine of his does try to keep him from me. She won't. She can't. Nothing can, triumphed the girl, smoothing the canvas that was her rival's plumage. He's going to be mine, with everything that he knows. So much better, and cleverer, and belonging to different sort of people as he is, and yet he's going to have me belonging to him. She's had the last of him putting her always first. She heard in the office Paul Dampier's short laugh and his, "Oh! You think so?" to the aeroplane lady. Gwenna scarcely wondered what this might be about. Some business to do with the machine, but he would come to an end of that soon. He'd come back to her, with that look in his blue eyes, that tone in his deep voice. She could wait patiently now for the day, whenever it came, when he should tell her definitely that he loved her and wanted her to be his. There would be that, of course, Gwenna, the inexperienced, still saw the proposal, as the scene set and prepared, the inevitable milestone beside the course of true love. Never mind that now, though. It didn't matter when. What mattered was that it would come. Then she would always be with him. It would be forever, like that blissful day in the hayfield, that summer night by the river at the dance, those few bewildering seconds on the Westminster scaffolding. And with no cruelty of separation afterwards to spoil it. Nothing was going to part them after all. She had finished the wing. She looked about for the next thing to do. There were 3 wings in the room, and all were finished. A 4th wing still lay, a skeleton of fretted and glued wood. In the workshops, the skin was not yet stretched over it, and there were no more letters to write for the firm. Gwenna had nothing to do. I shall have to go into the office and ask, she said, admitting to herself that she was glad enough to go. So often she had painted for herself, out of mere memories, the picture of her airman. He was now in the office, in the flesh. She need not have to satisfy herself with pictures of him. She slicked off her sticky pinafore. The white muslin blouse beneath it was fresh and pretty enough. She moved to the office door. It was her room. She had never yet had to knock at that door. She pushed it open and stood waiting. For a moment she only saw the aeroplane lady and the tall aviator. They had their backs to her. They were standing side by side and examining a plan that they had pinned up on the matchboarding wall. Paul Dampier's finger was tracing a little arc on the plan, and he was slowly shaking his head, with the gesture of a man who says that something won't do. The aeroplane lady's fingers were meditatively at her lips, and her attitude echoed that of the young man. Something that they had planned wouldn't do. Then Gwenna's eyes fell from these two people to that something. It was something that she had never seen about the aircraft works before. Indeed, she did not remember having seen it ever before, anywhere, except in pictures. This object was on the floor, half in and half out of the sealed wooden box that Paul Dampier had brought down with him in the car, and that he wouldn't let the workmen handle. So this was why. This was it. Aghast, she stared at it. It was a long, khaki-painted cylinder, and from one end of it a wicked-looking little nozzle projected for an inch or so. The other end, which disappeared into the box, showed a peep of a magazine and a pistol grip. Even to Gwenna's unskilled eyes the thing appeared instantly what it was. A machine gun. A gun? She thought, stupefied. Dear me, on an aeroplane? No, said Paul Dampier's voice suddenly, decisively, speaking to the aeroplane lady. It'll have to be a rifle after all. And with the sudden breaking of his voice upon her ear, there seemed to be torn from before the girl's eyes a corner of some veil. Quite suddenly, how, she could not explain. She knew what all this meant. That plan for that new flying machine, that gun, the whole object of the ambitions of these people with their so romantic profession, scraps of her aviator's talk about scouting and the new arm and modern warfare. Just now she had been swept up aloft by his look and tone into the seventh heaven of a woman's delight. That was love. Here, epitomized in that cylinder with that vicious little nozzle, she saw the power that could take him from her yet. This was war. A shudder ran over her. Her mind took no notice of the facts that there was no war for him to go to, that this grim preparation must be for experimenting only, for manoeuvres, sham fights, that this was July 1914, an era of sleepy peace, except for that gossip, half a joke, that we might have civil war in Ireland yet, and that she and he and everybody they had to do with lived in the 20th century. In England? Perhaps it was because she was not English, but British, Welsh. She entirely lacked that Anglo-Saxon balance of which the English are so proud, and that stolidity and that unimaginativeness. Her imagination caught some of those unheard, unsuspected messages with which the air must have been vibrant all those midsummer weeks. Her quick, unbalanced Celtic fancy had already shown her as clearly as if she had seen it with her eyes that image of his aeroplane as a winged and taloned woman. Rival. Now it flashed before her, in a twink, another picture, Paul Dampier, seated in that aeroplane, swooping through the air, armed and in danger. The danger was from below. She did not see that danger. She saw only the image against grey, scudding clouds of the beloved. But she could feel it, that poignant threat to him in every second of his flight. It was not the mere risk of accident or falling. It was a new peril of which the shadow, cast before, fell upon the receptive fancy of the girl who loved the adventurer. And, set to that shadow picture in her mind, there rang out to some inner sense of hers a voice that sounded clear and ominous words. They called to her, fired at both by friend and foe, then stopped. The young girl didn't remember ever to have heard or even to have read these words. How should she? It was the warning forecho of a phrase now historic, but then as yet unuttered, that had transmitted itself to some heightened sense of hers, fired at both by friend and foe. There. It was gone, the waking vision that left her trembling with a certainty. Yes, here was the meaning of the sealed box, of the long confabulation of her airman with the aeroplane lady. War was coming, and they knew. Gwenna, standing there in the doorway, drawing a long breath and feeling suddenly rather giddy, knew that she had come upon something that she had not been meant to guess. What was she to do about it? Her hand was on the knob of the door. Must she close it upon herself or behind her? Should she come forward and cry, "Oh, if it was a dreadful secret, why didn't you lock the door?" Or should she go out noiselessly, taking that burden of a secret with her? She might confess to the aeroplane lady afterwards. Here she saw that the airman had half turned. His boyish, determined profile was dark in shadow against the plan on the wall. The plan of the PDQ sunlight through the office window touched and gilded the edge of his blonde head. "Yes, I thought so. Have to be a rifle after all," he repeated in a matter-of-fact tone. Then, turning more round, his glance met the startled eyes of the girl in the doorway, and that finished the dilemma for Gwenna. Something rose up in her and was too strong to let her be silent. "Oh, I've seen it!" she cried sharply. "Paul!" He took one stride towards her and slipped his arm about her as she swayed. She was white to the lips. "Is there any water?" began young Dampier, but already the aeroplane lady had poured out a glassful. It was he, however, who put it to Gwenna's lips, holding her still. "It's all right, darling," he said reassuringly, and the giveaway word slipped very easily from his tongue. "Better, aren't you? Frightfully muggy in that room with those radiators. You oughtn't to be... Here." He took some of the cold water and dabbed it on her curls. I suppose he knew he could trust the child, thought the aeroplane lady as she closed the door of the wing room between herself and those two in the office. But I don't know that I should have engaged her if I'd known. I don't want lovers about the place here. Of course, this explains his aviation dinner and everything. Little Gwenna, standing with her small face buried against the aviator's tweed jacket, was sighing out that she hadn't meant to come in, hadn't meant to look at that horrible gun. The girl didn't know what she was saying. The boy scarcely heard it. He was rumpling with his cheek the short, silky curls he had always longed to touch. Presently he tilted her cherub's head back against his shoulder, then put both his hands about that throat of hers. She gave an unsteady little laugh. "You'll throttle me," she murmured. Without loosening his clasp, he bent his fair head further down and kissed her very gently on the mouth. "Don't mind, do you?" he said into another kiss. "Do you?" At that moment, the little thing in his arms had banished all thought of those big things from his mind. PRT2 JULY, August, September 1914. Chapter 1. THE Aviation Dinner. Gwenna began to feel a little nervous and intimidated, even in the car that took herself and the aeroplane lady and the airman to the aviation dinner. 100 yards before they reached the portals of the club in Pall Mall, that car stopped. Then it began to advance again, a yard or two at a time. A long row of other cars and taxis was ahead, and from them alighted guests in dull black opera hats with mufflers. Once or twice there was the light and jewelled gleam of a woman's wrap, but they were mostly men who were driving up. "Colonel Conyers," said Paul Dampier to the attendant in the great marble-tiled entrance. Then he was shown off to the right, Gwenna and the aeroplane lady to the dressing rooms on the left. Before an immense glass they removed their wraps and came out to the waiting room, the girl all misty white with the sky-blue sash and the dancing shoes, the lady gowned in grey satin that had just the gleam of aluminium in that factory of hers, and with her brooch of the winged serpents fastened at her breast. They sat down at one of the little polished tables in the waiting room, under the long windows onto Pall Mall. It was a high, light-panelled room with a frieze of giant roses. A couple of ladies went by to the dressing room, greeting Mrs. Crewe as they passed. Then there stopped to speak to her, a third and older and very handsome lady, all in black, with diamonds ablaze in her laces and in her grey piled-up hair. "There should be some good speeches tonight, shouldn't there?" said this lady. "All these splendid men. You know, my dear, take us for all in all." And she gave a little laugh. "We are splendid." "But there are so few of us," said the aeroplane lady ruefully. The other woman, about to pass on, stopped for a moment again, and looking over her white shoulder said, very seriously, something that both her hearers were to remember. "If England is ever to be saved, it will be by a few." She went out, and Mrs. Crewe said to Gwenna, "That was Lady something, the wife of the man who's as responsible as most people for the security of this empire." Most of the people there seemed to know the aeroplane lady quite well, Gwenna noticed, when Paul Dampier came up and took them out into the central hall again, where the guests were assembling. The place seemed as high as a cathedral, with a marble floor, and alcoves, and tall, classic, brass tripod things to hold the end of men's cigarettes and ashes. The aeroplane lady was at once surrounded by a group of men. Gwenna, feeling very shy and little and of no account, turned to her airman. You said, she murmured reproachfully, that there weren't going to be a lot of grand people. These aren't grand, bless you. People aren't, who are really, well, who do things, as you say. Not nearly as frilly here as at the Smiths, that other dinner, he said, smiling down at her. I'm going to bring up Colonel Conyers and introduce him to you. Him? Good gracious, thought the little Welsh girl in consternation to herself. Colonel Conyers? Oh, no, please, I should be much too frightened. But the tall figure had detached itself from a group at a word from Paul Dampier, and Colonel Conyers came up. Gwenna recognised the lean, smiling, half-mischievous face of the soldier who, those ages ago, had talked to those ladies in the motor car at Hendon. This was the man they called Aircraft Conyers, the man practically at the head of aeronautics, Paul had said, the man in whose hands rested, among so many, many other things, the whole career of the inventor of the PD coup. Gwenna, with her curly head whirling, felt inclined to drop a schoolchild's curtsy to this great one of the councils of the earth. He took her hand into his own long, lean one. How do you do? He drawled, smiling cheerfully. Starving, what? I am, I can tell you, always late here. Won't be long now. You're at my table, I believe. Then, almost anxiously, fond of chocolates, you are? Good, then I can collect the lot of those little silver dishes around us and pretend it's all for you. It's for me, really, Gwenna, who was not able to help laughing at this unexpectedness on the part of the great Aircraft Conyers, said, Are you fond of them? Passionately. Passionately, said Colonel Conyers with a nod, as he turned to find his own dinner partner. Didn't frighten you much, did he? Laughed Paul Dampier to the little thing at his side. Course he didn't. I'll tell you who most of the others are when we get into the supper room. In the great supper room with its painted ceiling and gilded pillars, dinner was laid on a number of small tables for parties of 6 or 8. Gwenna found herself the only woman at their table, the aeroplane lady sitting far down at the other end of the room. All dazed, the young girl looked about her like a stray bird that has fluttered in through an open window. Beside her, Paul Dampier pointed out to her this celebrity and that at the tables. Colonel Conyers you've seen. That personage had nodded to the young girl over a stack of pink roses and had made a little movement to show the basket of sweets beside his plate. Now that man with the order, that's Lord so-and-so, Director of Coast Defence. And that so-and-so, Chief Engineer. And that little man one down, in the opposite direction from where I'm looking. That's so-and-so, Editor of the Air. Wonderful chap, brains enough to sink a ship. An extraordinary mixture of men, Gwenna thought, as her glance followed his direction, and he went on talking. Soldiers, sailors, chemists, scientists, ministers, all banded together. Ranks and fortunes were merged. Here were men of position, men of brains, men of money, men whose names were in all the newspapers, and men the papers had never heard of, all with one aim and object, the furtherance of civilization's newest advance, the conquest of the air. The dinner proceeded. Pale amber wine whispered and bubbled in her glass, dishes came and went, but the girl scarcely knew what she ate or drank. She was in a new world, and he had brought her there. She felt it so intensely that presently it almost numbed her. She was long past the stage of excitement that manifests itself in gasps and exclamations. She could speak ordinarily and calmly when Paul Dampier, turning from his talk to a physical laboratory man in a very badly brushed coat, asked her, Well, find it interesting? You know I do, she said, with a grave little glance. He said, smiling, What did you say to the red-haired youth about not going to the matinee with him first? Mr. Ryan? Oh, I just told him I hadn't got over my headache from the smell of dope, and that I was afraid it would tire me too much to do both. Pretty annoyed, I expect, wasn't he? Yes, he was, replied Gwenna, with the absolute callousness of a woman in love towards the feelings of any but the one man. She did not even trouble whether it had been the feelings or the vanity of Mr. Peter Ryan that had been hurt. What mattered was that Paul Dampier had not wished her to go to that matinee. Paul Dampier said, Well, I cried off an engagement tonight too. Colonel Conyers wanted to take me back with him. But I'm seeing you home. Oh, but you mustn't, you needn't, she protested happily. I'm not going down to the works, you know, tonight. I'm sleeping at the club. I'm staying this weekend with Leslie. With Leslie, are you? But I'm taking you up to the club afterwards, he persisted. A fellow's got to look after. Here he laughed a little as if it were a joke that pleased him. A fellow's got to look after his fiancée, hasn't he? She was a little subdued. She thought for the moment that he had put Colonel Conyers off, not for her after all, but for that machine of his. Then she thought, no. The machine was second now. She said, half in hope, half in dread, "Do you mean the PDQ?" He turned, with his mouth full of salad, staring whimsically at her. "The PDQ? What are you thinking of? I meant you." "Me?" She gave a little gasp. Life and happiness were too much for her again. She felt as if that whispering, untouched champagne in her glass had gone to her head. Was it really true, that he had said? "Well, aren't you?" he said gaily, but dropping his voice a little as the conversation rose about them. "Aren't you that to me? Engaged, aren't we?" "Oh, I don't know," the young girl said breathlessly. It was as if the moon that one had cried for had suddenly dropped, to lie like a round silver mirror in one's lap. "Did you mean that yesterday afternoon?" "Didn't I mean it before that?" he said, half to himself. "What about all those dances? That time when Hugo dragged me off to that place by the river? Those would have been most incorrect," he teased her, "if we hadn't been. We shall have to be, my dear." Then an impulse took her. "It is known to any young girl who is sincerely in love. No, don't let's," she said suddenly, "don't let's be engaged." For it seemed to her that a winged dream was just about to alight and to become a clumsy creature of earth, like that aeroplane on the flying ground. The boy said, staring at her, "Not be engaged? Why on earth? How do you mean?" "I mean, everybody gets engaged," she explained very softly and rapidly over the bread that she was crumbling in her little fingers. "And it's such a sort of fuss with writing home and congratulations and how long has this been going on and all that sort of thing. People at tea parties and things talking about us. I know they would," declared the Welsh girl with distaste, "and saying, 'Dear me, she looks very young,' and wondering about us. Oh no, don't let's have it. It would seem to spoil it for me. Don't let's call it anything, need we? Don't let's say anything yet, except to just US." "All right," said the boy with an easy shrug. He was too young to know what he was escaping. "Sure, I don't mind, as long as you're just with me, all the time we can," she said, wonderfully sedate above the tumult in her heart. "Did you bring my locket with you tonight?" "No, I didn't. Do you know why? Can't you guess?" "Because I wanted to give it back to you when I could put it round my girl's neck," he told her. And she turned away from him, so happily confused again that she could not speak. She was his girl, his, and because he was one of this band of brothers, sitting here feasting and talking, each making it his business to contribute his share to the sum of what was to be one of the world's greatest forces, why? Because of that, even she, little Gwenna Williams, could feel herself to be a tiny part of that force. She was an aviator's girl, even if it were a wonderful secret that nobody knew, so far, but he and she. Already everybody at that table, and many others in the room, had remarked what a pretty little creature young Dampier's sweetheart was. "The King," announced the president of the dinner. There was a movement and a rustle all round the great supper room as the guests rose to the toast, another rustle as they reseated themselves. One of the celebrities whom Paul had pointed out to her began to speak upon the achievements of Wilbur Wright. At the table next to Gwenna, some journalists bent absorbed over scribbling pads. Speech followed speech as the toasts were gone through. The opal-blue haze of cigarette smoke drifted up above the white tables with their rose-pink and ferny decorations. Chairs were pushed sidewards as guests turned alert, and listening faces towards the head of the room, and every now and again the grave and concise and pleasantly modulated tones of some speaker on the subject of his heart were broken in upon by a soft storm of applause. "Colonel Conyers to speak now," murmured Paul to Gwenna, as the long, lean figure that had been sitting opposite to them rose. He stepped backwards to stand against one of those gilded pillars as he made his speech, responding to the toast that had coupled his name with that of the flying wing of the army. Gwenna listened with even more breathless attention than she had paid to the other speakers. Colonel Conyers spoke easily and lightly, as if he had been, not making a speech, but talking to a knot of friends at his house. He reviewed, in terms so simple that even the young girl at his table could follow all he said, the difficulties and the risks of aviation, and the steps that had been taken to minimize those risks. Wind, it seemed, had been in a great measure overcome. Risk from faulty workmanship of machines, that, too, was overcome. Workmanship was now well nigh as perfect as it could be made. Here Gwenna glowed with pride, exchanging a glance with her employer far down the tables. This meant their workmanship at aircraft factories, their factory too. This meant the labours of Mrs. Crewe and of Mr. Ryan, and of Andre, and of the workmen in overalls at the lathes in that noisy central shop. Even the brushful of dope that she, Gwenna, spread conscientiously over each seam of the great wings played its tiny part in helping to preserve a flyer's life. The risk instability, too, Colonel Conyers said, had been successfully combated by the gyroscope. There remained, however, fog and darkness as the chief perils, which, at the present moment of July 1914, our airman had to fight. In the soldier's lean face that shrewd, half-mischievous smile was flickering as he spoke, his grey trim head turning now and again against the gilded column, his keen eyes fixed upon some objective of his own, his strong hand fidgeting in the small mechanical gesture of a man who is less accustomed to speaking about things than to doing them. Gwenna thought how different, how entirely different were all these people here from that other dinner party at the house of the prosperous and artistic Smiths who had found so much to say about the Russian ballet. Definitely now, Gwenna saw what the chief difference between them was. Those other people treated and spoke of a pastime as though it were a matter of life and death. These people here made life and death matters their pastime, and these splendid real people are the ones I'm going to belong to, the girl told herself with a glance at the tall boy beside her who had decided her fate. That thought was to glow in the very depths of her, like a firefly nestling at the heart of a rose, for as long as she lived. The even, pleasant tones of Colonel Conyers went on to give as one of the most hopeful features of aviation the readiness of the quite young man of the present day to volunteer. No sooner was a fatality announced than for one airman who, cheerfully giving his life for the service of his country, had been put out of action, half a dozen promising young fellows were eager to come forward and take his place. 2 of them again yesterday, 2 of his lieutenants killed in Yorkshire, whispered Paul Dampier, leaning to Gwenna. She missed the next sentence of Colonel Conyers, which concluded cheerily enough with the hard-worked but heartening reminder that whom the gods love die young. Then, with a broadening of that humorous smile and with a glint in his eyes, he referred to those other people, plump and well-to-do and quite young people, who do, still, really appear to consider that the whole of a man's duty to his country is to preserve his health for as long as possible, and then, having reached a ripe old age, to die comfortably and respectably in his bed. There was a short ripple of laughter about the room, but after this Gwenna heard very little. Not only was she incapable of taking any more in, but this last sentence pulled her up with a sudden memory of what she had seen yesterday. That gun at the aircraft works. That pictured presentiment in her own mind. And she heard again, through Colonel Conyers' pleasant voice, the queer, unexplained words that had haunted her, fired at by both friend and foe. She thought, I must ask. I must say something to Paul about that. Chapter 2. Th. Whisper, O-F-W-A-R. She said it after the dinner had broken up. In the great hall, young Dampier had turned to the aeroplane lady with his offer of motoring her to her hotel first. She had good-naturedly laughed at him and said, No, I'm going to be driven back by the rightful owner of the car this time. You take Miss Williams. And then she had gone off with some friend of Paul's who had motors to lend, and Paul had taken Gwenna to find a taxi to drive up to Hampstead. They drove slowly through Piccadilly Circus, now brighter than at midday. It was thronged with the theatre crowds that surged towards the crossings. Coloured restaurant coats and jewelled headgear and laughing faces were gay in the lights that made that broad blazing belt about the fountain. Higher up the whole air was a soft haze of gold, melting into the hot star-strewn purple of the night sky. And against this there tapered, black and slender, the apex of the fountain, the downward swooping shape that is not Mercury, but the flying Love, the lad with wings. Paul Dampier leant back in the closed cab and would have drawn the girl to him. She put both hands on his broad chest to hold him a little away from her. I want to ask you something, she began a little tremulously. It's just, is there going to be, well, what? He asked, smiling close to her. Of all things that he least expected came what the girl had to say. Is there going to be a war, Paul? A what? He asked, thinking he had not heard aright. She repeated it tremulously. A war. Real war. War? He echoed blankly, taken aback. He was silent from puzzled astonishment over her asking this as they turned up Shaftesbury Avenue. They were held up outside the Hippodrome for some minutes. He was still silent. The taxi gave a jerk and went on, and she still waited for his reply. She had to remind him. Well, she said again, tremulous, Is there going to be? A war? A war indeed, he said again. What an extraordinary, what put such a thing into your head, she said. Is there? The boy gave a half-amazed, half-uneasy laugh. He retorted, What do you mean, Gwenna? A war where? She said flutteringly. Anywhere. Oh, he said, and laughed as if relieved. Always some war, somewhere. Frontier shows in India, and so on. There is some scrapping going on in Europe too now, you know. Looks as if Austria and Servia were going to have a set, too. You mean that? No, I don't, persisted the Welsh girl, to whom these places seemed indescribably remote and beside the mark. I mean, a war to do with us, like. Us? To do with England. But, he said, frowning. Why, how absurd! A war with England. Why, of course not. Why should you think of it? She cleared her throat and answered with another tremulous question. Why should you have that gun thing on your aeroplane? Not going to, not on the PDQ, he said, shaking his head. Only an experiment anyhow. Why should you have experiments with those things? She faltered. Have to be a rifle, you said. Why should you talk about scouting and modern warfare? I wasn't, he said quite hotly. Yes, you were. That day we were together. That day in the field when you were talking to me about the machine. Oh, then, weeks ago. Yes, why should there be all that, unless you meant that there'd be a war with England in it? Paul, she cried almost accusingly, you said yourself that it was bound to come. Oh, well, everybody said that, he assured her lightly. Can't help seeing Germany, and that fleet of hers, and her Zeppelins and things going on build. They don't do that for their health, you bet. Scrap's bound to come, yes. Sooner or later. Yes, Paul, but when? How should I know, my dear child, retorted the young airman. Why didn't you ask Lord Thingamy or Conyers at the club just now? He laughed. Good speech of his, wasn't it? Does he know? Persisted Gwenna, paling. About the war coming, I mean. More likely to know than I am, those people. Not that they'd give it away if they did. It won't be tomorrow anyway. Tomorrow, that's Sunday. Our holiday. Another day we shall have all to ourselves. Tell me what time I'm to call for you at the club. Not to be put off, she retorted, timid, persistent. Tell me when you think it would come. Soon. Half laughing, half impatient, he said, I don't know. Soon enough for it to be in my time, I hope. But, she said with a little catch in her voice, you're not a soldier, he said quietly. I'm an aviator. An aviator, yes. That was what she meant. He belonged to the most daring and romantic of professions. The most dangerous, but not that danger. An inventor part of his time, the rest of his time, an airman at Hendon who made flights above what the man with the megaphone called the air Riodrome, above the khaki-green ground with the pylons and the border of summer-frocked spectators. Her boy, an aviator. Would that mean presently a man flying above enemy country, to shoot and be shot at? Fired at by both friend and foe? She said quiveringly, You wouldn't have to fight, he said. Hope so, I'm sure. Oh, Paul, she cried, aghast, her hands on his arm. Just when I've only just got you. To lose you again so soon. Oh, no. Oh, I say, darling, don't be so silly, he said briskly and reassuringly. He patted the little hands. We're not going to talk about this sort of thing, do you hear? There's nothing to talk about. Actually, there's nothing. Understand? Yes, she murmured slowly. She thought, actually, there's nothing to talk about in what's between him and me. But it's there all the time. And then, gradually, that presentiment of war began to fade in the reality of her joy at being with him now, with him still. They turned up the Hampstead Road, flaring with naphtha lights above the stalls, noisy with shouts of costers, crowded with the humble shoppers of Saturday night. Well, and what about tomorrow? Dampier took up. I was going with Leslie to... So you said, with Leslie indeed. Do you think you're going to be allowed to go anywhere again except with me? He muttered as he put his arms about her. He held her as close as he had done on the scaffolding that afternoon when he had arranged with himself never to see the little thing again, close as he'd done next time he did see her, at the factory. Oh, you don't know, he said quite resentfully, while she laughed softly and happily in his hold. You don't know how I've wanted you with me. I haven't been able to think of anything. You have got a fellow fond of you in a jolly short time, haven't you? Have you done it, Here, he broke off savagely. What is this dashed idiot stopping the taxi for? Because I get out here. It's the club, Gwenna explained to him gravely, opening the door of the cab for herself. Good night. What? No, you don't, protested the boy. We're going up the Spaniards Road and down by the Whitestone Pond and round by Hendon first. I must take you for a drive. It's not so late." "Hang it, I haven't seen you to speak to." She had made a dash out and across the lamplighted asphalt, and now she nodded to him from the top step of the house, with her key already clicking in the lock. There, she thought, for even in the tie that binds the most adoring heart, there is twisted some little gay strand of retaliation. Let him feel that after a whole evening of sitting in her pocket, he hadn't seen anything of her. She'd known that sort of feeling long enough. Let him take his turn, let him have just a taste of it. "Good night," she called softly to her lover before she disappeared. "See you tomorrow." Chapter 3. THELAST, Sunday OF Peace. Never had Gwenna risen so early after having spent so little of a night in sleep. Into the small hours she had crouched in her kimono on the edge of Leslie's camp bedstead in the light that came from the street lamp outside the window, and she had talked and talked and talked, for by not saying anything about it, she had never meant keeping her happiness from that close chum. Miss Long, sincerely delighted, had listened and had nodded her wise black head from the pillow. She had thrown in the confidante's running comments of, "There. What did Leslie tell you? Oh, he would, of course. Good. Oh, my dear, how exactly like them all. No, I didn't mean that. Of course there's nobody like him. I meant fancy." "Yes, and then what did Paul say, Virginia?" At last repetitions had cropped up again and again into the softly chattered recital, with all its girlish italics of, "Oh, but you don't know what he's like. Oh, Leslie, no, you can't imagine." At last Leslie had sighed, a trifle enviously. And little Gwenna, pattering to the head of the bed, had put her cheek to the other girl's and had whispered earnestly, "Oh, Leslie, if I only could, do you know what I'd do? I'd arrange so that he had a twin brother exactly like him to fall in love with you." "Taffy, you are too sweet," the elder girl had whispered back in a stifled voice. Gwenna never guessed how Leslie Long had had much ado not to giggle aloud over that idea, to think of her, Leslie, finding rapture with any one of the type of the Dampier boy. A twin brother of his? Another equally bread and buttery blonde infant, an infant in arms who was even simpler than Monty Scott. Oh, Ishtar, for thus does one woman count as profoundest boredom what brings to her sister ecstasy itself. And now here was Gwenna, all in white, coming down to the club's Sunday breakfast with her broad hat already on her head and her gloves and her vanity bag in her hand. At the head of the table sat the vicar's widow with the gold curb brooch and the look of resigned disapproval. Over the table, Miss Armitage and the other suffrage workers were discussing the Cat and Mouse Act. Opposite to them, one of the art students, with her hair cut a la Trilby, was listening bewildered, ready to be convinced. Not one of the usual things remained unsaid. Presently, Gwenna's neighbour and bête noire, Miss Armitage, was denouncing the few remaining members of her sex who still seemed to acquiesce in the Oriental attitude towards woman, who still remained serfs or chattels or toys. "However, thou needn't think thy count," declared the lecturer firmly, stretching without apology across her neighbour to get the salt. With some distaste Gwenna regarded her. She had spots on her face. "Pleasers of men," she pursued with noble scorn. "The remnant of the Slive girl type, now happily extinct." Loud cheers from Leslie Long. "The serpent's tile," continued the suffragette, "the serpent's tile that, after the reptile has been beaten to death, still goes on feebly wriggling." "Better wriggle off now, Taffy, my child," murmured Leslie, who sat facing the breakfast-room window. "Here's a degraded Oriental coming up the path now to call for his serf." "You come," said Gwenna, warmly flushed as she rose. And she held her chum's long arm, dragging her with her as she came into the hall where the tall, typically English figure of her airman stood, his straw hat in his hand. A splash of scarlet from the stained glass of the hall door fell upon his fair head and across his cheek as he turned. "Good morning," said Gwenna sedately, and without giving him so much as a glance. She felt at that moment that she would rather keep him at arm's length forever than allow him even to hold her hand, with Leslie there. For it takes those who are cooler in temperament than was the little Welsh girl, or those who care less for their lovers than she did, to show themselves warmer in the presence of others. "Hullo," said Paul Dampier to her. Then, "Hullo, Miss Long, how d'ye do?" Leslie gave him a very hearty shake of the hand, a more friendly glance, and a still more demure inquiry about that machine of his. Paul Dampier laughed, returning her glance. She was a sport, he thought. She could be trusted not to claim just yet. The bet she'd won from his cousin, the laughing wager about the aeroplane versus the girl. 15-1 on the girl, wasn't it? And here was the girl home in his heart now, with the whole of a gorgeous July Sunday before them for their first holiday together. "I say, I'm not too early now, am I?" he asked as he and the girl walked down the club steps together. "I was the first time, so I just went for a walk round the cricket pitch and back. Sickening thing, I couldn't rake up a car anywhere for today. Put up with trains or tubes and taxis instead, I'm afraid." "Do you mind? Where shall we go?" "Flying, of course," was Gwenna's first thought. Now, at last, he'll take me up. But that would be for the afternoon. For the morning they wanted country, and grass, and trees to sit under. Not Hampstead, Richmond Park was finally decided upon. "We'll taxi to Waterloo," the boy said with an inward doubt. He dived a long brown hand into his pocket as they walked together down the road that Gwenna used to take every morning to her Westminster bus. He was particularly short of money just then. Dashed nuisance, just when he would have wished to be particularly flush. That's what came of buying a clock for the machine before it was wanted. Still, he couldn't let the little thing here know that. Manage somehow. A taxi came rattling down the Pond Street hill from Belsize Park as they reached the stopping place of the buses, and Paul held up his hand. "Taxi?" But the driver shook his head. He pulled up the taxi in front of a small, rather mean-looking house close to where Gwenna and Paul were standing on the pavement. Then his fare came out of the house, a kit bag in each hand and a steamer rug thrown over his arm. He was a small, compactly built young man in clothes so new and so smart that they seemed oddly out of place with the slatternly entrance of his lodging-house. It was this that made Paul Dampier look a little hard at him. Gwenna was wondering where she'd seen that blonde, grave face of his before. He sprang lightly into the cab. A pink-faced girl was sitting there whom Gwenna did not see. If she had seen her, she would have recognised her Westminster colleague, Ottilie Becker. "Liverpool Street," ordered Miss Becker's companion, setting down his luggage. Then, raising his head, he caught the eyes upon him of the other young man in the street. He put a hand to his hat, gave a quick little odd smile, and leaned forward out of the cab. "Auf Wiedersehen," he called as the taxi started off, "for Liverpool Street." "Deuce did he mean by that?" exclaimed the young Englishman, staring after the cab. "Who on earth was that fellow?" "I didn't know him." "Nor did I." "But I have seen him," said Gwenna. "I believe I have, somewhere," said Paul, musing. They puzzled over it for a bit as they went on to Waterloo on the top of their bus. And then, when they were passing the Horseshoe in Tottenham Court Road, and when they were talking about something quite different, about the river dance in fact, they both broke off talking sharply. Gwenna, with a little jump on the slanting front seat, exclaimed, "I know!" just as Paul said, "By Jove, I've got it!" "I know who that fellow was, that German fellow just now. He was one of the waiters at that very dance, Gwenna." Gwenna, turning, said breathlessly, "Yes, I know, the one who passed us on the path. But I've thought of something else, too. I thought then his face reminded me of somebody's. I know now who it is. It's that fair young man who came down to try and be taken on at the works." "At Westminster?" Paul asked quickly. "No, at the aircraft works one afternoon. He talked English awfully well, and he said he was Swiss. And then André, you know, the big, dark French workman, talked to him for quite a long time in French. He said he seemed very intelligent. But he wouldn't give him a job whatever. He wouldn't. No, I heard him tell the aeroplane lady that the young man, ce garçon-là, came from the wrong canton," said Gwenna. "So he went away. I saw him go out. He was awfully like that German waiter. I suppose most Germans look alike, to us." "S'pose so," said the aviator, adding, "Was that the day that drawing of mine was missing from the aircraft works, I wonder?" She looked at him, surprised. "I didn't know one of your drawings was missing, Paul." "Yes. It didn't matter, as it happened. Drawing of a detail for my machine. I've taken jolly good care not to have complete drawings of it anywhere," he said, with a little nod. And some minutes later, they had begun to talk of something else again, as the bus lurched on through the hot, deserted Sunday streets. The morning that had brought Gwenna to her lover left Gwenna's chum for once at a loose end. "Leslie, my child, aren't you a little tired of being the looker on who sees most of the game? Won't you take a hand?" Miss Long asked herself as she went back into her club bedroom. It was scented with the fresh smell of the rosemary and bay rum that Leslie used for her ink-black sheaf of hair, and there drifted in through the open window the sound of bells from all the churches. Sunday. My free morning. The better the day. So I'll settle up at last what I am going to do about this little matter of my future, she decided. She sat down at the little bamboo writing table set against the bedroom wall. Above it there hung, since this was a girl's room, a looking-glass, and about the looking-glass there was festooned a little garland made up of dance programmes, dangling by their pencils, of gaudy paper fans from restaurants, and of strung beads. Stuck crookedly into a corner of the glass there was a cockling snapshot. It showed Monty Scott's dark head above his sculptor's blouse. Leslie picked it out and looked at it. "Handsome, wicked eyes," she said to it lightly. "The only wicked things about you, you unsophisticated infant, in arms." Then she said, "You and your sculpturing, just like a baby with its box of bricks. Besides, I don't suppose you'll ever have a penny. One doesn't marry a man because one may like the look of him. No, boy." She flicked the snapshot aside. There was conscientious carelessness in the flick. Then she took out the leather-cased ink bottle from her dressing bag and some paper. She wrote, "M.Y. Dear Hugo." Then she stopped and thought, "Maudie and Hilary Smith will be pleased with me. So will the cousins, the opulent cousins who've always been kind about clothes they've finished wearing, and invitations to parties where they want another girl to brighten things up. You can give some bright parties for them now, Leslie. Good reason number 99 for saying yes." She took up her pen. "Nothing," she murmured, "nothing will ever kill the idea that the girl who isn't married is the girl who hasn't been asked. Nothing will ever spoil the satisfaction of that girl when showing that she has." She wrote down the date, which she had forgotten. "Poor Monty would be so much more decorative for show purposes. But I explained quite frankly to Hugo that it would be his money I'd want," she wrote, after thinking it well over. Then again she meditated. Great things, reasons. The reason why so many marriages aren't a success is because they haven't enough reasons why behind them. Now, how far had I got with mine? Ah, yes. Reason number 100. I'm 26. I shall never be any better looking than I am now. Not unless I'm better dressed. Which, reason 101, I should be if I married Hugo. Reason 102, my old lady won't live forever, and I should never get a better job than hers. Except his. Reason number 102.5, I do quite like him. He doesn't expect anything more, so there's the other half reason for taking him. Reason 104, he's never disapproved of me. Whereas Monty always likes me against his better judgment. Much nicer for me, but annoying for a husband. I should make Hugo an excellent wife, she added this half aloud to the snapshot. I should never shock him, never bore him, never interfere with him, never make him look silly, any sillier than he can't help looking with that hair and that necktie he will wear. Leslie would have the sense, when she wasn't amusing him at the moment, to retire to her own rooms, reason 105 for marrying well, and to stay there until she was fetched. Reason A, here, in the full flow of her reasoning, Miss Long cast suddenly and rather violently down her pen, and tore the sheet with Hugo's name in it into tiny strips that she cast into the empty fireplace. "I can't think to write a good letter today," she excused herself to herself as she got up from her chair. "I'm tired. It was all that talking from Taffy last night. Bother the child, bother her. It's unsettling, bother all engaged girls. And all the people shall say amen. I wonder where they went to. I shall ring up somebody to take me on the river, I think." Plenty of time to say yes to Hugo later. The letter to Hugo, between the lines of which there had come the vision of an engaged girl's happy face, remained, for the present, unfinished. Leslie went to the telephone. "Oh, Chelsea," she called. "I want to speak to Mr. Scott, please." She thought, "This shall be my last free Sunday, and I'll have it in peace." In Richmond Park, the grass was doubly cool and green beneath the shade, both of the oaks and of the breast, high bracken where Gwenna and Paul Dampier sat, eating the fruit and cake that they had bought on the way, and talking with long stretches of contented silence. They were near enough actually to London and the multitude. A town and people seemed far away, out of their world today. Gwenna's soft, oddly accented voice said presently into the warm stillness, "You'll take me up this afternoon?" "Up," he said idly. "Where to? Up flying, of course." "No, I don't think so," said the young airman quietly, putting his chin in his hand as he lay in his favourite attitude, chest downwards in the grass, looking at her. "Not flying? Not this afternoon? Don't think so, little thing." "Oh, you're lazy," she teased him, touching a finger to his fair head and taking it quickly back again. "You don't want to move. Not going to move either, not until I've got to." She sighed, not too disappointed. Here in the dappled shade and the solitude with him, it was heavenly enough, even if she did glance upward at the peeps of sapphire, blue through the leaves, and wonder what added rapture it would be to soar to those heights with her lover. "Do you know how many times you've put me off?" she said presently, fanning the midges away from herself with her broad white hat. "Always you've said you'd take me flying with you, Paul, and always there's been something to stop it. Let's settle it now. Now, when will you?" "Ah," he said, and flung the stone of the peach he'd been eating into the dark green jungle of bracken ahead of them. "Good shot. I wanted to see if I could get that knob on that branch." She moved nearer to him and said coaxingly, "What about next Sunday?" "Hope it'll be as fine as this," he said, smiling at her. "I'd like all the Sundays to be just like this one. Can't think what I did with all the ripping days before this, Gwenna," she said. "I meant, what about your taking me up next Sunday?" "Nothing about it," he said, shaking his head. There was a little pause. He crossed his long legs in the grass and said, "Not next Sunday, nor the Sunday after that, nor any Sunday, nor any time. I may as well tell you now. You aren't ever coming flying," said the young aviator firmly to his sweetheart. "I've settled that." The cherub face of the girl looked blankly into his. "But Paul, no flying? Why? Surely, it's safe enough now. Safe enough for me, and for most people. But you've taken Miss Conyers and plenty of girls flying." "Girls, yes. And you promised to take me." "That was ages ago. That was when you were a girl too." "Well, what am I now, pray? Don't you know?" "Not a girl. My girl," he said. Then he moved. He knelt up beside her. He made love to her sweetly enough to cause her to forget all else for a time. And presently, flushed and shy and enraptured, she brought out of her vanity bag the tiny white wing that was to be his mascot, and she safety-pinned it inside the breast of his old grey jacket. "That ought to be fastened somewhere to the PDQ, he suggested. But she shook her head. No, it was not for the PDQ, it was for him to wear. Then she saw him weighing in his hand her own mascot, the little mother-of-pearl heart with the silver chain. "Ah, you did remember to bring it at last," she said. Nestling against his arm, she lifted her chin and waited for him to snap the trinket about her neck. He laughed and hesitated. She looked at him rather wonderingly. Then he made a confession. "Do you know, I do hate to have to give it back again, Gwenna. I've had it so long. Might as well let me hold on to it." "May I?" "Oh, you are greedy for keepsakes," she said, delighted. "What would you do with a thing like that?" "I've thought of something," said he, nodding at her. She asked, "What?" "Tell you another time," he smiled, with the locket clutched in the hand that was about her waist. She flung back her head happily against his shoulder, curling herself up like a kitten in his hold. They had settled that they were going to walk on to Kew Gardens to tea, but it was not time yet, and it was so peaceful here. Scarcely anyone passed them in that nook of the park. Another happy silence fell upon the lovers. It was long before the boy broke it, asking softly, "You do like being with me, don't you?" There was no answer from the girl. "Do you, Gwenna?" It seemed still odd to be able to call her whatever he liked now. "Do you, my little sweet thing?" Still she didn't answer. He bent closer to look at her. Her long eyelashes lay like two little dark half-moons upon her cheeks, and her white blouse fell and rose softly to her breathing. Drowsy from the late hours she'd kept last night, and from the sun-warmed silence under the trees, she had fallen asleep in his arms. Her eyes were still shut when at last she heard his deep and gentle voice again in her ear. "I suppose you know you owe me several pairs of gloves, miss?" She laughed sleepily, returning, still a little shyly and unfamiliarly, the next kiss that he put on her parted lips. "I was nearly asleep," she said, with a little sudden stretch that ran all over her like a shake given to a sheet of white aluminium at the works. "Isn't it quiet? Feels as if everything was asleep?" She opened her eyes, blinking at the rays of the sun, now level in her face. "Oh, I should like some tea, wouldn't you?" They rose to go and find a place for tea in Kew Gardens, among the happy, lazing Sunday crowds of those whom it has been the fashion to treat so condescendingly, England's big middle classes. There were the conventional young married couples, she, wearing out the long tussar coat that seemed so voluminous, he, pipe in mouth, wheeling the wicker mail cart that held their pink and white bud of a baby. There were also courting couples innumerable. Not all of these were as reticent in the public eye as Gwenna had been with her lover before Leslie. To Gwenna, the bright landscape and the coloured figures seemed a page out of some picture book that she turned idly, her lover beside her. She had to remind herself that to these other lovers, she herself and Paul were also part of a half-seen picture. They sat down at one of the green wooden tea tables, and a waiter in a greasy black coat came out under the trees to take Dampier's order. Perhaps that started another train of thought in the girl's mind, for quite suddenly she exclaimed, "Ah, I've thought of another German now that he was like." "Who was that?" asked Paul. "Only a picture I used to see every day, a photograph that our Miss Baker kept pinned up over her desk at the works in Westminster," explained Gwenna. "The photograph of that brother of hers that she was always writing those long letters to." "Always writing, was she? Was he a waiter?" "No, he was a soldier." "He was in uniform in that photo," Gwenna said, as the little tray was set before her. "Karl was his name, Karl Becker. Do you take sugar?" "Yes. You'll have to remember that for later on," he said, looking at her with his head tilted back and a laugh in his eyes as she poured out his tea. She handed it to him, and then sat sipping her own, looking dreamily over the English gardens, over the green spaces flowered with the light frocks and white flannels of other couples who perhaps called themselves in love, and who possibly imagined they could ever feel as she and her lover felt. "Deluded beings," she murmured. "What do you suppose all these people are thinking about?" "Oh, either they'll go to Brighton or to Southend for their fortnight, I expect," returned Paul Dampier. "Everybody's thinking about holidays just now." Later, they stood together in the hushed gloom of the big chestnut aisle beside the river that slipped softly under Kew Bridge, passing the willows and islands and the incongruously rural-looking street of Strand on the green. One of the cottage windows there showed red blinds, lighted up and homely. Young Dampier whispered to his girl, "Going on holidays myself, perhaps, presently, eh?" "Oh, Paul," she said blankly, "you aren't going away for a holiday, are you?" "Not yet, thanks. Not without you." "Oh," she said. Then she sighed happily, watching the stars. "Today's been the loveliest holiday I've ever had in my life. Hasn't it been perfect?" "Not quite," he said, with his eyes on those red-lighted windows on the opposite bank. "Not perfect, Gwen." "Not?" she took up quickly, wondering if she had said something that he didn't like. Almost roughly he broke out, "Oh, I say, darling, don't let's go and have one of these infernally long engagements, shall we?" She turned, surprised. "We said," she reminded him, "that we weren't engaged at all." "I know," he said. Then he laughed as he stooped and kissed her little ringless fingers and the palms of her hands. "But—" There was a pause. "Got to marry me one day, you know," said young Paul Dampier seriously. He might have spoken more seriously still if he had known that what he said must happen in 10 days' time from then.